The first light of dawn gently filters through the narrow arched windows of the keep, casting long, muted shadows across the stone floors. The air is still cool, carrying the damp scent of the previous night's mist that lingers in the castle corridors. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, its call echoing through the courtyard, signalling the start of another day. Within the great hall, the hearth is nothing but a faint glow of embers, its warmth having long faded in the night. Servants begin to stir, their footsteps soft against the stone as they shuffle from their sleeping quarters to their assigned tasks. For them, the day starts early and ends late, each hour marked by a predictable, unchanging routine. The castle's steward, a grizzled man with thinning hair and a stern gaze, is already up, his sharp eyes inspecting the great hall for any signs of disarray. He notices a fallen goblet beneath one of the long wooden tables, likely left behind by a drunken guard or a careless servant the night before. With a sigh, he picks it up, wipes away the dried wine, and places it back on the table. The morning must begin with order. In the kitchen, the scullery maids stifle yawns as they haul heavy buckets of water from the well. The metal clinks and splashes as they pour the water into basins for washing dishes and preparing the morning meal. The kitchen is a hub of quiet activity, the scent of stale bread and old meat mingling in the air. The cook, a stout woman with ruddy cheeks and flour-streaked hair, barks orders in a hushed tone. "Fetch the firewood. We'll need it to bake the bread. And where's that boy with the eggs?" Outside in the courtyard, the stable boys are already tending to the horses. The animals stamp and snort as the boys brush their coats, their warm breath misting in the chilly morning air. The stable master stands by, his hands tucked into his tunic for warmth, his eyes half-lidded with sleep. He watches as a scrawny lad struggles to lift a heavy bale of hay, grunting with effort. "Lift with your legs, not your back," the stablemaster mutters, more to himself than to the boy. Elsewhere in the keep, the knights are waking, each stretching and rubbing the sleep from their eyes. The barracks are cramped and cold, the straw-filled mattresses thin and lumpy. A few knights murmur to one another as they don their padded underclothes and armour, the clinking of metal and the creaking of leather echoing through the room. Outside, the castle guards make their first patrol of the day, their boots thudding against the stone walkway that encircles the walls. Their eyes scan the horizon, finding nothing but the usual rolling hills and mist-shrouded forests. In the solar, the lady of the castle rises slowly from her bed, her chambermaid assisting her in washing her face with a cloth dipped in cool water. The chambermaid moves with practiced precision, her hands deft and sure as she braids her lady's hair. The room is still dim, illuminated only by the faint light seeping through the oiled parchment window. The lady gazes out, her expression blank, her thoughts her own. In the great hall, the servants have begun setting up the long tables for the morning meal. Wooden trenchers are placed at regular intervals, each filled with yesterday's bread and a small portion of cheese. The lord of the castle, still in his nightclothes, descends the staircase, his eyes heavy with sleep. He says nothing as he takes his place at the high table, his jaw set, his mind already churning with the day's responsibilities. From the chapel, the soft, steady murmur of morning prayers rises, carried through the halls by the cold morning air. The castle chaplain recites the familiar words in a monotonous drone, the monks echoing in unison, their voices low and rhythmic. The smell of melting candle wax mingles with the chill, creating a scent both comforting and slightly stale. The castle awakens slowly, as it does every morning, each stone absorbing the growing warmth of the rising sun. The air fills with the subtle sounds of daily life, the scraping of wooden stools against the floor, the soft slosh of water in basins, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Outside the castle walls, the village is coming to life too, smoke rising from thatched roofs, the distant bleating of sheep drifting in on the wind. For now, the castle is at peace, each resident slipping into their accustomed roles. each hour already planned and predictable. The day has begun, as it always does, quietly, methodically, unremarkably. The morning meal in the great hall is a solemn, subdued affair. The vast room, with its high, vaulted ceilings and thick stone walls, is still shrouded in the early morning chill. Though a few torches flicker along the walls, their flames dance weakly, barely casting enough light to dispel the lingering shadows. The air is heavy with the mingled scents of stale bread, wood smoke, and a faint, underlying musk of unwashed bodies. Servants move quietly through the hall, their footsteps muffled against the cold stone floor. They carry wooden trenchers laden with slices of yesterday's bread, hard and crusty, slightly stale but softened with a smear of animal fat or a thin layer of pottage. Each trencher is set down carefully, the hollow clunk of wood against wood reverberating in the otherwise hushed hall. There is little in the way of variety. Bread, a thin stew of lentils or beans, and perhaps a few dried fish for those of higher rank. At the high table, the lord of the castle sits, his broad shoulders draped in a fur-lined cloak to ward off the chill. His eyes are fixed on the opposite wall, where a tapestry depicting a long-forgotten battle hangs limp, its colours faded by years of smoke and dust. A servant pours a small cup of ale, the liquid sloshing slightly as the vessel is placed beside the lord's trencher. The lord nods absently, his gaze distant, lost in thought. Beside him, the lady of the castle stirs a wooden spoon through her bowl of thin porridge, her delicate fingers wrapped around the spoon's handle, as though it is the only warmth she can find. Her expression is blank, her eyes downcast. She listens as the lord murmurs something to the steward, his words low and clipped. The steward nods, his face impassive, then shuffles away to instruct the servants. Along the lower tables, the knights and guards sit shoulder to shoulder, their breath misting in the frigid air as they tear into crusts of bread. They chew methodically, their jaws working with the mechanical rhythm of men too tired to speak. Here and there, a few muted conversations rise. A whispered complaint about the cold, a grumbled comment about the stale bread. One knight, younger than the rest, sits hunched over his bowl, using a piece of bread to scoop up a small portion of pottage. The stew is thin, more water than meat, with a few limp vegetables floating in the murky broth. He takes a bite, chewing slowly, his eyes fixed on the distant hearth, where a lone servant prods at the fading embers, trying to coax them back to life. Further down the table, a pair of scullery maids stand against the wall, their arms crossed over their chests, watching as the meal unfolds. They will not eat until everyone else has finished, and even then, their portions will be meagre, consisting mostly of the crusts and scraps left behind. One of the maids, a girl barely in her teens, stifles a yawn, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. The older maid beside her nudges her gently, a silent reminder to stand up straight and keep her eyes downcast. The air is heavy with the quiet clinking of wooden cups and the soft scraping of knives against wooden trenchers. Occasionally, the steward's sharp voice cuts through the silence, issuing orders to the servants to bring more ale, to clear a spilled trencher, to refill the lord's cup. The servants move quickly, their eyes lowered, their faces blank and expressionless. At the high table, the lord finally breaks the silence, his deep voice echoing through the hall. He asks for news from the village, the status of the grain stores, the progress of the smithy, the condition of the stables. The steward answers each question promptly, his responses short and to the point. The lord nods, his expression never changing, his mind already turning to the tasks of the day. The lady of the castle remains silent, her spoon resting motionless in her bowl. She watches as a young serving girl approaches, her hands shaking slightly as she pours a small cup of ale. The girl spills a few drops, her face flushing as the lord glances at her sharply. The girl mutters an apology and scurries away, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The meal drags on, each bite a laborious effort, each swallow accompanied by the faint echo of clinking cups and muffled conversation. Outside, the wind howls through the courtyard, a reminder that the day has only just begun and that the chill will linger long after the meal is over. When the last trenches have been cleared and the final cup of ale has been drained, the servants begin to gather the remains of the meal: crusts of bread, scraps of fat, a few stray bones. These will be set aside for the dogs or for the poorest of the castle's inhabitants, those who hover at the edges of the courtyard, hoping for a morsel of food. The Lord rises from the high table, his cloak swishing against the stone floor as he strides toward the staircase that leads to his solar. The knights and guards follow suit, standing and stretching, their joints popping as they prepare for the day's duties. The servants move quickly, clearing the tables, scrubbing the wooden trenches, sweeping away the crumbs and spills. The great hall, once filled with the dull murmur of conversation, slowly empties, the lingering scent of bread and ale dissipating into the cold, still air. The hearth is down to a single glowing ember, its faint red light pulsing like a heartbeat in the darkness. Outside, the sky is fully awake, the sun a pale, distant orb barely piercing the grey clouds. The day has begun in earnest, and soon the great hall will be bustling again. But for now, it remains a cold, empty expanse of stone and shadow. The remnants of breakfast, nothing but a memory. The air in the castle is filled with the low, steady hum of activity as the day's work begins in earnest. The courtyard is a hive of motion, a place where every step, every swing of a hammer, every grunt of effort has a purpose and a place. There is no room for idleness here. Each person, from the lowliest stable boy to the Lord himself, has a role to play, and every task is a small but necessary cog in the intricate machinery that keeps the castle functioning. In the kitchens, the scullery maids plunge their hands into basins of icy water, scrubbing the wooden trenches clean with rough cloths. The water is clouded with bits of soggy bread and congealed fat, and the maids work in silence, their fingers numb, their backs aching from bending over the heavy basins. The cook stands nearby, her round face set in a scowl as she barks orders to the kitchen boys. They scurry back and forth, carrying sacks of flour, hauling buckets of water, and stoking the hearth's fire to prepare for the midday meal. Near the hearth, an older woman kneads dough with steady, practiced movements, her thick forearms dusted with flour. The rhythmic push and fold of the dough is almost hypnotic, a soft, repetitive sound that mingles with the crackling of the fire. She works in silence, her gaze fixed on the dough, her mind wandering far away from the cold, dim kitchen. Out in the courtyard, the blacksmith is already at his forge, his muscular arms glistening with sweat despite the chill in the air. The clang of hammer against metal rings through the courtyard, each strike precise, each blow sending sparks dancing like fireflies. The blacksmith's apprentice, a gangly boy with a face smudged with soot, pumps the bellows, his thin arms straining as he feeds air into the fire, making it roar and glow with a fierce orange light. The blacksmith pauses to inspect the red-hot horseshoe he is shaping, his eyes narrowed, his expression grim and focused. Across the courtyard, the stable boys are busy mucking out the stalls, their shovels scraping against the stone floors as they scoop out piles of damp straw and manure. The horses whinny and stomp, their eyes rolling, their breath steaming in the cold air. One of the stable boys, a small, wiry lad with a mop of unruly hair, struggles to lift a particularly heavy bucket of soiled straw. He grits his teeth, his face red with exertion, as the stablemaster watches with a critical eye. Inside the keep, the laundresses gather in a small, draughty room near the kitchens, where a steaming cauldron of soapy water bubbles over a fire. They scrub at soiled linens and tunics, their hands red and raw from the lye soap, their shoulders aching from the constant, repetitive motions. The room is filled with the pungent smell of wet cloth and wood smoke, and the women speak in low, murmured tones, their words drowned out by the sloshing of water and the steady scrubbing of cloth against washboard. In the great hall, the steward is conducting his morning inspection, his sharp eyes darting from corner to corner, noting every speck of dust, every misplaced goblet, every unevenly spaced bench. He calls out orders to a group of servants, instructing them to sweep the floors again, to polish the silverware, to replace the burnt-out torches in the sconces. The servants nod dutifully and disperse, their faces blank and expressionless as they move to complete their tasks. Up in the solar, the lady of the castle sits with her chambermaids, their nimble fingers busy with needle and thread. They stitch and mend, their heads bent low over their work, their faces drawn and expressionless. The room is filled with the soft, repetitive sound of needles piercing cloth, the occasional sigh of frustration when a thread tangles or a stitch goes awry. The lady herself is working on a piece of embroidery, her needle moving in slow, deliberate strokes as she weaves a delicate pattern of flowers and vines. Beside her, the chambermaid hums a soft, mournful tune, her eyes distant, her hands working mechanically as she patches a hole in a tunic. In the barracks, the knights and guards are busy maintaining their weapons and armour. The clang of steel against stone echoes through the room as they sharpen their swords. Each stroke of the whetstone slow and deliberate. A young squire polishes a suit of mail, his hands moving in small circular motions as he buffs the links to a dull metallic sheen. The older knights watch him with a mixture of amusement and pity, their faces hardened by years of battle, their eyes hollow and tired. Up on the battlements, the guards keep their vigil, their eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. The wind howls around them, biting through their cloaks and sending chills down their spines. One guard shifts his weight from foot to foot, trying to keep warm, while another squints against the pale grey sky, his hand shielding his eyes from the glare. There is nothing to see, only the same rolling hills, the same clusters of trees, the same empty expanse of countryside, but still, they watch, their eyes trained and unblinking, their breaths fogging the air in front of them. Below in the dungeons, the jailer makes his rounds, his heavy boots echoing through the dim, dank corridors. He carries a ring of keys that jangle with every step, the sound sharp and metallic against the oppressive silence. The prisoners sit, huddled in the shadows, their eyes hollow, their faces gaunt and unshaven. The jailer pauses to peer into each cell, his expression bored and indifferent. For him, it is just another day, another round of monotonous duty, another set of faces staring back at him with the same dull, unseeing eyes. As the day drags on, the castle settles into its relentless rhythm, each task performed with mechanical precision, each chore completed without question or complaint. The scullery maids continue to scrub, the blacksmith continues to hammer, the chambermaids continue to stitch, the guards continue to patrol. The sun rises higher in the sky, its pale light streaming through narrow windows, casting long, slanted shadows across the stone floors. For the servants, the knights, the lords and the ladies, time passes in slow, predictable cycles, each hour blending into the next, each task as monotonous and unremarkable as the last. It is a life of ceaseless labour, a life defined by routine and repetition, a life in which the days pass without distinction, without variation, without end. The castle's walls are as much a prison as they are a fortress. They rise high, impenetrable, casting long shadows over the courtyard and the surrounding landscape. Outside, the world stretches vast and unyielding, a patchwork of fields, forests, and winding roads. Inside, the air is heavy, thick with the scent of damp stone and the lingering chill that seeps through every crack and crevice. For those confined within these walls, the world beyond is a distant dream. A place they can glimpse from narrow windows but rarely, if ever, touch. The lady of the castle stands at one such window, her delicate hands resting against the cold stone sill. Outside, the sun hangs low in the sky, its light muted and pale, filtering through a haze of clouds. Below, in the courtyard, the guards move in slow, measured paces, their armour clinking softly with each step. A pair of scullery maids hurry across the yard, their heads down, their arms full of linens to be washed. The lady watches them, her gaze distant, her mind wandering far beyond the castle walls. She was not always confined to this keep. Once, she moved freely through the village, visiting the market stalls, strolling through the fields, attending church without a retinue of servants and guards. But that was before her marriage, before she was brought to this castle to bear heirs and run the household. Now, her days are defined by the confines of her chambers and the endless duties that bind her to the keep, the embroidery, the bookkeeping, the overseeing of the servants. It is a life of stillness, a life that moves in slow, predictable circles, a life in which the days blur together like a dream. In the lower chambers, the castle's youngest residents, the children of the lord and lady, are being instructed by the tutor. The room is small and sparsely furnished, with only a wooden bench, a few scrolls, and a single flickering candle to illuminate the space. The children sit side by side, their eyes fixed on the tutor, who drones on about the exploits of ancient kings and the intricacies of Latin grammar. The eldest son, a boy of 10, fidgets in his seat, his eyes darting toward the window, where a sparrow flits back and forth, free as the wind. The boy sighs and shifts, his legs swinging restlessly beneath the bench. His sister, a girl of 7, sits with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the tutor's chalk-stained hands as he scrawls a list of Latin verbs across the wooden board. Outside, the sounds of the courtyard drift through the narrow window, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the shouts of the guards, the bark of a dog chasing after a runaway chicken. The children hear it all but dare not look away from the tutor's stern face, his eyes sharp as a hawk's as he watches them from beneath heavy brows. In the tower chambers, the eldest daughter of the castle, a girl of 16, sits alone at her spinning wheel. The room is dimly lit, the only light coming from a small, oil-fed lamp that casts flickering shadows across the stone walls. The girl's hands move with practiced ease, her fingers deftly twisting and pulling the wool, spinning it into fine, even thread. The wheel creaks and groans, a monotonous sound that fills the room like a lullaby. She hums softly to herself, a tune she heard long ago, a song her nurse used to sing when she was a child. Outside, the wind howls through the narrow window slit, its mournful wail echoing through the room. The girl shivers and draws her shawl closer around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the spinning wheel as it turns, round and round, without end. In the servants' quarters, the chambermaids gather around the hearth, their faces flushed from the heat of the fire. They sit on low stools, their skirts hiked up to warm their legs, their hands wrapped around cups of thin, watery ale. The youngest of them, a girl named Eleanor, stares into the flames, her eyes distant and unfocused. She was brought to the castle 2 years ago, taken from her village after her father fell into debt with the Lord. Now, her life is a series of endless tasks: scrubbing floors, hauling water, tending the lady's wardrobe, sweeping the hall. There is little time for rest, and even less for freedom. Yet at night, when the fire burns low and the other maids drift off to sleep, Eleanor sits alone by the hearth, staring into the embers, dreaming of the day she might slip through the gates and run far away. Above the keep, in the Lord's solar, the Lord himself paces back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. A letter lies open on the table, its wax seal broken, its contents grim. He mutters to himself as he paces, his brow furrowed, his jaw clenched. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, a ghostly howl that sends a shiver down his spine. He is trapped in this castle, just as much as his wife, his children, and his servants. Though he is lord of the keep, his power ends at the walls. Beyond them lies the domain of his rivals, men who would seize his lands and his titles if given half a chance. Every day, he receives news of skirmishes, of raids, of alliances forged and broken. Every night, he lies awake in his bed, his ears straining for the sound of horses' hooves or the clash of steel. The castle may be a fortress, but it is also a cage, a stone shell that keeps the outside world at bay, but also traps its inhabitants within. The walls are thick, the gates are barred, the guards patrol day and night, but the feeling of confinement is as palpable as the cold stone beneath their feet. Even the guards, those men who walk the battlements with swords at their hips and arrows at the ready, feel the weight of the walls pressing down on them. Day after day, they pace the same paths, stare out at the same barren fields, watch the same empty roads for signs of danger that never come. Sometimes, when the night is particularly still and the wind is particularly cold, one of the guards will lean against the parapet and stare up at the stars. He will think of the village where he was born, the fields where he once ran as a boy, the river where he once swam on hot summer days, and he will wonder if he will ever see them again, or if he is destined to spend the rest of his days walking the walls, staring out at a world he can never truly touch. For the Lord, the lady, the children, the servants, and the guards, the walls are a constant, unyielding presence. A reminder that life in a castle, though safer than life outside, is a life defined by boundaries. Boundaries of stone and mortar, boundaries of duty and obligation, boundaries that hold them fast, day after day, night after night, without end. The wind howls outside the walls, a lonely, haunting sound that seems to carry the whispers of the world beyond, the world they once knew, the world they still long for, the world that lies just out of reach. And so they stand at their windows, their eyes fixed on the distant hills, dreaming of freedom, dreaming of escape, dreaming of a life beyond the walls. The Great Hall is the beating heart of the castle, a cavernous room that serves as the centre of life, both grand and mundane. It is a space that echoes with the voices of those who gather here, nobles, knights, servants, and guests, each contributing to the din that reverberates off the cold stone walls. The air is thick with the scent of roasting meat, the pungent aroma of burning tallow candles, and the musty odour of damp rushes strewn across the floor. At the far end of the hall, a long wooden table dominates the space, raised slightly above the rest of the room on a dais. This is the Lord's table, where he and his family sit, positioned to overlook their subjects, a constant reminder of their status and power. The table is laden with platters of roasted game, hares with their legs twisted into grotesque shapes, glistening boar heads with apples shoved into their gaping mouths, steaming loaves of black bread and bowls of thick barley stew. The Lord himself sits at the centre, his eyes scanning the room as he gnaws on a hunk of venison, grease dripping down his beard. Beside him, his wife sips her watered-down wine, her face composed, her eyes fixed on her plate. The children, arranged in order of age and importance, sit to either side, their expressions ranging from boredom to petulance as they pick at the food set before them. The eldest son, barely a teenager, slouches in his chair, his eyes darting toward the courtyard where the knights are practicing their swordplay. Below the dais, the household knights and retainers take their seats at the lower tables. The men are loud and boisterous, slapping each other on the back, tearing into hunks of bread, shouting to be heard over the din. Their laughter is raucous, their faces flushed with wine, their words laced with crude jokes and boasts of past battles. Nearby, a squire struggles to refill their goblets from a heavy sloshing pitcher, his hands trembling beneath its weight. The servants, of course, do not sit. They move swiftly through the hall, balancing platters of food, pouring ale, wiping up spills, and dodging the grabbing hands of drunken knights. The kitchen boys scurry in and out, carrying trays laden with steaming pies, roasted fowl, and puddings made from boiled oats and honey. The air grows thick with the mingling scents of spices, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, a luxury reserved for the Lord's table and a reminder of the wealth and power he wields. At the far end of the hall, near the hearth, the minstrel plucks at his lute, his fingers dancing across the strings as he sings a bawdy tune about a knight and a milkmaid. The knights roar with laughter, pounding their fists on the table, demanding another verse. The minstrel grins and obliges, his voice rising over the din, his eyes scanning the room for the Lord's reaction. The Lord, half listening, smirks and raises his goblet, signalling his approval. In a corner of the hall, a group of women sit together, their heads bowed as they gossip in hushed tones. They are the wives and daughters of the household knights, and their words are as sharp as the knives they use to slice their meat. They whisper of secret liaisons, of who was seen slipping into whose chambers in the dead of night, of who has fallen out of favour with the Lord, and who has caught the eye of the visiting knight. The lady of the castle listens to them with one ear, her face impassive as she continues to sip her wine. Beneath the table, her hand clenches into a fist, her nails digging into her palm. The talk of liaisons and secret meetings stings her more than she will admit, but she keeps her expression neutral, her eyes fixed on the flickering flames in the hearth. Near the hearth, a pair of hounds loll about on the floor, gnawing on discarded bones and snapping at each other when one gets too close. The dogs are lean and scrappy, their coats matted, their eyes darting from side to side as they sniff the air for fallen scraps. A servant boy kicks at one of them as he passes, and the dog snarls, its hackles rising before slinking away to the shadows. At the back of the hall, 2 guards stand near the entrance, their eyes scanning the room, their hands resting on the pommels of their swords. They do not eat, and they do not speak. They stand like statues, their gazes fixed and unblinking, their faces shadowed beneath the rims of their helmets. The Lord insists on guards in the hall, even during meals, a habit born of too many betrayals, too many knives in the dark. The noise in the hall rises and falls in waves, the clatter of dishes, the clinking of goblets, the laughter and shouts of the knights, the plaintive strumming of the minstrel's lute. The air is stifling, thick with the scent of sweat and meat and sour wine. The torches smoke and sputter, casting long wavering shadows across the walls, making the banners ripple and dance as if caught in an unseen wind. As the meal drags on, the servants grow weary, their steps slower, their faces drawn and pale. The children slump in their chairs, their eyelids drooping, their heads nodding forward as sleep threatens to overtake them. The knights grow louder, their laughter more forced, their eyes glazed with drink. The Lord leans back in his chair, his belly full, his mind heavy with thoughts of debts and taxes and the ever-present threat of war. Eventually, the steward rises from his seat and signals to the servants. The meal is over. The guests begin to rise, some stumbling, some steady, their boots scuffing against the stone floor. The knights clap each other on the back, making promises to meet in the training yard at dawn. The ladies gather their shawls, their faces flushed, their whispers hushed as they pass by the Lord's table. The children are carried off to bed by their nurses, their faces slack with sleep, their limbs dangling like rag dolls. The Lord and Lady rise together, their movements slow and deliberate as they make their way toward the solar. The Lady glances back at the hall one last time, her eyes sweeping over the now empty tables, the spilled wine, the half-eaten loaves, the discarded bones. The servants descend upon the tables like vultures, snatching up scraps of meat and crusts of bread, shoving them into their mouths before the steward can catch them. The scullery maids carry off the empty platters, the kitchen boys scrub the tables clean, the dogs gnaw on the bones left beneath the benches. The minstrel packs away his lute, his fingers stiff and aching, his voice hoarse from singing. The guards remain at their posts, their eyes watchful, their jaws set. Outside, the wind howls through the courtyard, rattling the shutters, sending chills down the spines of those still awake. The great hall, once filled with light and noise and life, now stands empty and echoing, its hearth reduced to a smouldering pile of embers, its tables barren, its floors strewn with the debris of another night's feast. The torches gutter and smoke, their flames shrinking, their light fading, until the hall is plunged into darkness, its shadows thick and still as a tomb. The Lord's bedchamber is a sanctuary of sorts, a private world tucked away high within the castle keep, far from the noise and chaos of the great hall and the bustling courtyard. It is a room designed not only for sleep, but also for the assertion of power, a place where the Lord can retreat, confer with trusted advisors, and share moments of intimacy with his wife. The room is dominated by a grand, canopied bed, its wooden posts thick and ornately carved with images of hunting scenes, knights in battle, and the twisting coils of mythical beasts. The bed is a fortress within a fortress, its heavy frame draped in thick curtains of crimson velvet, the fabric lined with fur to keep out the night's chill. The mattress is stuffed with goose down, an extravagant luxury, and piled high with blankets woven from the softest wool. Beneath the covers, the sheets are cool and crisp, smelling faintly of lavender, a scent the Lady insisted upon to mask the ever-present odour of damp stone and stale air. Above the bed, a wooden canopy stretches like a ceiling of its own, painted with scenes of the heavens, stars, moons, and distant, ethereal clouds. The artwork is delicate, fading in places, the colours dulled by time and the constant assault of candle smoke. When the Lord lies in bed at night, staring up at those painted stars, he sometimes imagines himself lying beneath the open sky, free of the suffocating walls that press in around him. Beside the bed stands a wooden chest, reinforced with iron bands and secured with a heavy iron lock. It holds the Lord's most prized possessions, a jewelled dagger given to him by his father, a parchment bearing the royal seal that grants him dominion over these lands, and a silver goblet engraved with the family crest. The key to the chest hangs around his neck, a constant reminder of what he must guard, what he must protect. A tapestry hangs on the wall, its colours rich and vibrant, depicting a battle scene from the days of his ancestors. Knights on horseback charge across a field, their swords raised, their banners streaming behind them like the tails of comets. The Lord's eyes often linger on the face of the knight at the centre of the scene, a stern-faced warrior who bears a striking resemblance to his own father. The resemblance is not lost on him. It is a reminder of the legacy he must uphold, the duty that weighs upon his shoulders. Across the room, a large hearth crackles with a steady orange flame, its warmth seeping into the cold stones and casting flickering shadows across the walls. The hearth is flanked by two heavy chairs, their wooden frames thick and imposing, their cushions worn from years of use. This is where the Lord and Lady sit in the evenings, their voices low as they discuss matters of state, family, and the ever-present spectre of war. The walls are adorned with weapons, swords, daggers, a crossbow with a quiver of bolts. Each weapon is polished to a mirror sheen, its blade sharp enough to slice through flesh and bone. The Lord insists upon keeping them here, close at hand, a habit born from years of sleepless nights, from too many whispered threats and unspoken dangers. There is a knife beneath his pillow, a dagger tucked beneath the mattress, a short sword leaning against the bedpost. He tells himself it is precaution, but in truth, it is fear. Near the window, a wooden writing desk stands, its surface cluttered with parchment, quills, and ink pots. The Lord's seal, a heavy ring engraved with the family crest, rests atop a stack of unfinished letters. Some are addressed to neighbouring lords, seeking alliances or offering warnings. Others are to the royal court, begging for reinforcements or requesting a stay of taxes. But the letters that haunt him most are those that bear no seal at all. Letters written in his own hand, meant for his son, his daughter, his wife. Letters that speak of love, of regret, of things he cannot bring himself to say aloud. The window is narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, yet it offers a view of the surrounding countryside that stretches for miles. Beyond the castle walls, the fields are dark and silent, the trees swaying in the wind, their branches creaking like the bones of old men. The village below is a cluster of shadows, its thatched roofs and narrow lanes shrouded in mist. The river glimmers faintly beneath the moonlight, a silver ribbon that winds its way toward the distant hills. The Lord stands at the window, his hands resting on the cold stone sill, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He feels the wind on his face, sharp and biting, and it reminds him of the battlefield, of the nights he spent lying in the mud, the rain pouring down, the cries of dying men echoing through the darkness. It has been years since he last rode into battle, years since he last felt the weight of a sword in his hand, the thrill of the charge, the terror of the clash. Yet even now he can still hear it. The clash of steel, the screams of men, the wet sucking sound of blades tearing through flesh. Behind him, the door creaks open and the lady steps inside, her nightgown trailing behind her like a ghostly shroud. Her hair is unbound, falling in dark waves over her shoulders, and her face is pale, her eyes dark and tired. She moves to the hearth, holding her hands out to the flames, seeking warmth in the midst of the castle's perpetual chill. The Lord watches her from the window, his eyes tracing the curve of her shoulders, the delicate line of her jaw. He thinks of the girl she once was, the girl he first met on a summer's day, when the fields were green and the flowers bloomed and the world seemed endless. That girl is gone now, buried beneath layers of duty and loss, of sleepless nights and empty days. They speak little, their words clipped and measured, their voices low and careful. They talk of their children, of the estate, of the rumours that filter through the castle walls, rumours of bandits on the road, of a lord to the north who has been gathering men, of a knight who was seen at court, his eyes fixed on the lady, his intentions clear as day. When the conversation ends, the lady moves to the bed, pulling back the heavy covers and slipping beneath them, her body sinking into the mattress with a sigh. The Lord extinguishes the candle on the desk, plunging the room into darkness. He climbs into bed beside her, his back to hers, the space between them a chasm of unspoken words and unmet gazes. In the dark, he can hear her breathing, slow and steady, the sound mingling with the crackling of the dying fire, the creak of the wooden beams, the distant howl of the wind. He closes his eyes and waits for sleep, but sleep does not come. Instead, he lies there, staring into the void, his hand resting on the hilt of the dagger beneath his pillow, his mind racing with thoughts of the past, of the future, of the walls that surround him, holding him fast, keeping him safe, keeping him prisoner, Hours pass. The fire burns low, the wind rises. The moon drifts behind a bank of clouds. The castle sleeps, but the Lord does not. He lies awake, eyes open, his body stiff and tense, his hand still clutching the dagger. The walls close in around him. The air grows colder. The darkness thickens, and in the silence, he feels it. The weight of the stone, the weight of the crown, the weight of all that he must carry, all that he must protect. Outside the window, the first pale light of dawn creeps over the horizon, washing the fields in a ghostly grey. The Lord watches it, his eyes hollow, his heart heavy, and he wonders how many more nights he will lie awake, waiting for sleep that never comes, waiting for a dawn that brings no relief. The kitchens are a world unto themselves, a hive of relentless activity hidden away from the more refined parts of the castle. Here, life pulses with the rhythm of chopping knives, bubbling cauldrons, and roaring fires. The air is thick with the mingling scents of roasting meat, boiling broth, fresh herbs, and the acrid tang of wood smoke. It is a place of heat, noise, and constant motion, a domain ruled by the cook, who wields a wooden spoon as if it were a scepter. The kitchen is vast, with low ceilings crisscrossed by heavy wooden beams blackened by years of soot and smoke. The stone walls are stained with grease and streaked with the residue of countless fires. Along one wall, an enormous hearth blazes day and night, its flames licking hungrily at the thick iron cauldrons suspended over the fire. These cauldrons bubble and hiss, filled with stews made from whatever meat is available, venison, rabbit, chicken, or even eel from the nearby river. A row of spits stretches across the hearth, each skewered with joints of meat slowly turning as sweat-drenched scullions crank the heavy mechanisms. The air is thick with the scent of roasting pork, the skin blistering and crisping over the flames, fat dripping and spitting into the fire below. The scullions' faces shine with sweat, their arms aching as they turn the spits hour after hour, their eyes darting nervously toward the cook, who barks orders and watches every move with a hawk's eye. Beside the hearth, a long wooden table stretches the length of the kitchen, its surface scarred with countless knife marks and stained with the blood of animals slaughtered earlier in the day. Butchers work with grim focus, their hands slick with blood as they hack apart carcasses, slicing through bone and sinew with practiced precision. The rhythmic thud of cleavers against wood echoes through the room, mingling with the sizzle of fat and the clatter of pots. Further down the table, a cluster of women knead dough with flour-dusted hands, their arms straining as they press and fold the dense mass over and over. The dough will become the thick, dark loaves of rye bread that sustain the castle's inhabitants, as well as delicate pastries filled with spiced fruit or nuts, reserved for the Lord's table. The women chatter quietly as they work, their voices low, their words half drowned by the din of the kitchen. A young girl darts among them, her face smudged with flour, her hands clumsy as she carries trays of fresh bread to the ovens. The ovens themselves are enormous, cavernous brick constructions that radiate an intense, almost unbearable heat. The bakers, their faces ruddy from the flames, use long wooden paddles to slide the loaves in and out, their arms shielded by thick, singed cloths. The smell of baking bread fills the air, a warm, yeasty aroma that momentarily masks the other. Less pleasant odours that linger in the kitchen. The stench of sweat and blood. The acrid scent of burning grease. Near the far corner of the kitchen, a cluster of wooden barrels lines the wall, each filled with different kinds of ale, beer, and mead. A servant boy fills tankards from a spigot, his hands sticky with spilled ale, his face flushed from the heat. The barrels are refilled regularly from the castle's brewery, where the brewer and his apprentices toil over vats of boiling grain and hops, their skin perpetually damp with steam. Above the chaos, the cook's voice rises, issuing commands with the authority of a general directing troops in battle. The cook is a large, formidable woman with powerful arms and a perpetual scowl. A thick apron protects her from splashes of boiling broth and flying grease, and a knife, as long as her forearm, hangs from her belt. She moves through the kitchen like a storm cloud, barking at the scullions to keep the spits turning, scolding the bakers for letting the bread burn, slapping the hands of children who dare to snatch a piece of dripping meat. Despite the constant din, the kitchen is organized chaos, each person knowing their role, each movement practiced and efficient. The younger children peel onions and turnips, their eyes stinging as they slice through the pungent bulbs, their hands red and raw from hours of labour. The older boys fetch water from the well, their shoulders aching beneath the weight of sloshing buckets, their tunics damp and clinging to their skin. At the far end of the kitchen, a separate room serves as the pantry. It is cool and dim, its shelves lined with sacks of flour, barrels of salted fish, crates of dried fruit, and strings of onions and garlic hanging from the rafters. The air is thick with the scent of herbs, rosemary, thyme, and sage, tied in bunches and hung to dry. The pantry is the domain of the steward, who guards its contents with a vigilance that borders on paranoia. Each day, he counts every sack, every barrel, every jar of honey and wine, his eyes narrowed as he records the numbers in a leather-bound ledger. Beyond the pantry lies the larder, a cold, dark room where meat hangs from hooks set into the ceiling beams. Sides of beef, legs of lamb, and plucked fowl sway gently in the cool air, their skins glistening with salt used to preserve them. Rats scurry along the floor, their tiny claws scraping against the stone, their eyes gleaming as they dart toward a dropped scrap of meat. The steward curses under his breath, swiping at them with a broom, his face twisted in frustration. Despite the order and efficiency, accidents are common. A boy carrying a cauldron of boiling broth trips, sending the scalding liquid sloshing across the floor. A scullion mishandles a knife, slicing open his palm, his blood mingling with the juices of the meat he was chopping. The cook curses, calling for a servant to fetch the healer, even as she slaps the boy's face and tells him to stop crying. The kitchen never truly sleeps. Even in the dead of night, there are servants tending to the hearth, keeping the coals alive so that the morning fires can be kindled without delay. The night watchmen come in for hot ale, their faces pale from the cold, their breath fogging the air as they huddle near the fire. The bakers rise before dawn to begin the day's first loaves, their hands moving methodically, their minds bleary with sleep. As the castle sleeps, the kitchen continues to pulse with life, its fires burning, its knives flashing, its scullions and bakers and cooks moving like cogs in a vast unwieldy machine. The air remains thick with heat and smoke and the ever-present scent of roasting meat, a scent that seeps into every stone, every wooden beam, every thread of cloth, lingering long after the fires have burned down to embers and the last pot has been scrubbed clean. In the dim light of dawn, the first rays of sun slip through the narrow high windows, casting thin beams across the stone floor. The servants, bleary-eyed and aching, begin again. The cook slaps a hunk of raw meat onto the table. The scullions sharpen their knives, the bakers pound the dough, and the day begins anew. The kitchen roars back to life, as it has done every morning for decades, a place where the cycle of work and toil never truly ends. The Lord's Hall is the grand heart of the castle, a vast, echoing chamber where power, wealth, and authority converge. It is here that the Lord holds court, dispensing justice, receiving guests, and hosting feasts that demonstrate his influence and hospitality. The hall is a space both imposing and impressive, designed to awe visitors and remind everyone of the Lord's status and the might of his lineage. The hall itself is a cavernous space with high, vaulted ceilings supported by thick wooden beams that stretch like the ribs of a great ship, The beams are intricately carved with symbols of the family's coat of arms, lions, eagles, or mythical creatures, each one a subtle reminder of the Lord's noble heritage. Torches mounted on iron sconces cast flickering light across the walls, creating a dance of shadow and flame that plays upon the cold, grey stones. The room is dominated by a massive, rectangular table set upon a raised dais at one end, where the Lord and his family dine in full view of their subjects. The table is adorned with a heavy cloth of rich, deep colours, crimson, sapphire or emerald, embroidered with gold or silver thread that glimmers in the torchlight. Beneath the table, the floor is strewn with fresh rushes mixed with fragrant herbs like lavender, mint and rosemary, meant to mask the less pleasant odours that accumulate over time. The rushes are changed periodically, though not frequently enough to prevent a mingling of scents, stale beer, spilled wine, and the lingering aroma of roasted meat. The stone floor is uneven, its cracks and crevices filled with years of dirt, crumbs, and scraps left by hounds that roam freely during meals, their noses sniffing eagerly for fallen morsels. At the head of the table, the Lord's chair looms large and imposing, crafted from dark polished oak and carved with elaborate patterns that symbolize his power. The back of the chair rises high, almost throne-like, capped with sharp finials and adorned with the family crest. Beside the Lord sits his lady, a vision of grace and poise, her gown flowing and embroidered with delicate patterns, her hair carefully arranged to display her status. Seated further down the table are members of the household, knights, retainers, visiting dignitaries, and favoured guests. The lower-ranking individuals, such as squires and men-at-arms, occupy wooden benches placed along the side walls or lower tables, where they eat from simpler fare and drink from crude wooden cups rather than the silver goblets reserved for the Lord and his closest allies. The distinctions in seating are subtle yet pronounced, a constant reminder of the strict hierarchy that governs every interaction in the hall. When the hall is prepared for a feast, it becomes a spectacle of opulence and grandeur. Long tables are set with gleaming platters piled high with roasted boar, venison and poultry, their skins glistening with honey glaze and sprinkled with fragrant spices imported from distant lands. Whole fishes are served on ornate platters, their scales shimmering beneath the torchlight, their eyes staring blankly upward. Freshly baked bread, dense and dark, is torn apart by eager hands and used to sop up thick spiced stews. Servants bustle through the hall, their arms laden with trenchers, slabs of stale bread that serve as makeshift plates, absorbing the juices of meat and gravy until they are sodden and almost inedible. Only the highest-ranking guests are given actual plates made of pewter or, for the most privileged, polished silver. Jugs of ale and mead are passed around freely, the liquid sloshing over the rims as men toast loudly to the Lord's health and the success of his recent campaign or harvest. Entertainment accompanies these feasts, with minstrels strumming lutes and singing ballads of heroic knights, tragic maidens, and great battles fought and won. Jugglers and acrobats perform feats of dexterity, their limbs twisting and contorting as they leap and tumble across the stone floor. Dwarfs or jesters, dressed in brightly coloured motley and jangling with tiny bells, caper and jest, their antics both amusing and slightly unsettling as they mock the guests with sharp, biting humour that often skirts the line of propriety. But the hall is not always a place of feasting and revelry. By day, it serves as the centre of administration and governance, where the Lord holds court and hears petitions from his subjects. Peasants and tenants, summoned by the Lord's bailiff or steward, enter the hall humbly, heads bowed, caps in hand, and state their grievances, disputes over land boundaries, accusations of theft, requests for mercy or leniency. The Lord listens, seated high on his imposing chair, his expression impassive as he dispenses justice with a wave of his hand or a nod to his steward. Justice in the hall can be swift and severe. A thief caught stealing a chicken may be sentenced to the stocks, his hands and feet clamped in wooden restraints while the crowd jeers and throws rotten vegetables. A man accused of assault might be flogged before the assembled onlookers, each lash echoing through the vast chamber like a crack of thunder. In more serious cases, such as accusations of treason or murder, the accused may be taken to the dungeons, their fate determined by the Lord's sense of mercy, or lack thereof. When the hall is not in use for feasting or court, it becomes a place of quiet industry. Servants sweep the floors, replace the rushes, polish the silver, and mend the tapestries that hang along the walls. These tapestries, woven in vivid colours and adorned with scenes of hunting, warfare, and chivalry, not only serve to insulate the hall from the chill, but also convey the power and prestige of the Lord and his ancestors. Each scene is a narrative, a visual representation of the family's legacy, a reminder to all who enter of the deeds and valour that have secured the Lord's position and authority. Despite its grandeur, the hall is not a place of comfort. The walls are cold and damp, the air heavy with the scent of burning tallow and stale ale. The vastness of the space amplifies every sound: the clatter of wooden cups, the bark of a dog, the murmur of servants whispering as they pass. In winter, the draught from the high, narrow windows chills the room, despite the roaring fire that blazes in the hearth at one end of the hall. In summer, the heat from the cooking hearth mingles with the press of bodies, creating a stifling, almost unbearable atmosphere. Yet the Lord's Hall remains the beating heart of the castle, a place where every aspect of life converges: feasting and fasting, justice and punishment, celebration and mourning. It is where power is asserted, where alliances are forged, where disputes are settled, and where the Lord's authority is both displayed and reinforced. In a world where survival depends on loyalty and strength, the hall is a constant, imposing reminder of who holds dominion over all within those cold stone walls. The solar is a sanctuary of warmth and relative comfort, a place reserved for the Lord, his lady, and their immediate family. It is a room set apart from the cold, austere stone chambers of the castle, positioned to capture the maximum amount of sunlight during the day. The solar is often located on the upper floors, away from the noise and bustle of the great hall and the kitchens, providing a retreat where the Lord and his family can relax, conduct private conversations, and engage in more personal domestic activities. Entering the solar, one is immediately struck by the contrast between this room and the rest of the castle. The walls are adorned with rich tapestries, their woven scenes depicting courtly life, romantic fables, or religious iconography. These tapestries are not merely decorative, they serve a practical purpose as well, insulating the room from drafts and helping to retain warmth. In winter, additional tapestries and heavy draperies are hung over the narrow, arched windows to keep out the biting cold, while braziers of glowing coals provide additional heat. The furnishings in the solar are more elaborate than in the rest of the castle, a reflection of the Lord's wealth and status. A large, ornately carved wooden chair, draped with furs and velvet cushions, serves as the lady's preferred seat, where she can sew, embroider, or simply sit and gaze out the window at the surrounding landscape. Nearby, a smaller, less elaborate chair is reserved for the Lord, its armrests smoothed and darkened by years of use. Between them, a low wooden table holds a scattering of parchments, a quill, and a small ink pot. For the Lord may use the solar as a place to handle personal correspondence, review accounts, or write letters to allies and relatives. The room is further softened by a scattering of cushions, stuffed with feathers and covered in embroidered silk or linen. These cushions are a rare luxury, as soft furnishings are not common throughout the rest of the castle, where stone benches and wooden stools are the norm. Here, though, the cushions provide a welcome respite from the hard, unyielding surfaces that dominate castle life. At the far end of the solar, a small hearth blazes with a controlled fire, its flames casting a gentle, wavering light over the room. Unlike the Great Hall's cavernous hearth, the fire here is smaller, more contained, with carefully selected logs that emit a steady, even heat. The hearth is often framed by a mantle adorned with small cherished items, a polished stone, a small carved figurine, or a precious cup passed down through the family. The windows of the solar are another distinguishing feature. While most castle windows are small, narrow slits designed for defense, the solar's windows are somewhat larger and sometimes fitted with wooden shutters that can be closed against the wind. In wealthier castles, the windows might be covered with translucent animal horn or even small panes of glass, a luxury reserved for the nobility. Glass, being expensive and fragile, is a sign of immense wealth, and only the most powerful lords can afford to glaze their solar windows. During the day, sunlight filters through these windows, filling the room with a soft, golden glow. It is a marked departure from the perpetual dimness of the rest of the castle, where thick walls and narrow arrow slits cast every room in shadow. The warmth and light of the solar make it an ideal space for the lady to gather her ladies-in-waiting, young maidens, and trusted companions to spend the afternoon engaged in more genteel pursuits. Here the lady might oversee the spinning of wool, the weaving of fine linen, or the embroidery of intricate designs onto cushions, tunics, or banners. The ladies gather around the hearth, their hands deftly stitching delicate flowers, birds, or family crests onto fabric, their voices low and murmuring as they share the latest gossip from court or the village below. The solar is a place of feminine influence, where women can converse freely without the intrusion of men, and where they can exercise their skills in sewing, reading, or storytelling. For the lord, the solar serves as a more private retreat, a place where he can temporarily set aside the burdens of rule and enjoy some semblance of domestic life. He might sit with his wife, discussing matters of the estate or sharing news from the latest hunting expedition. Or, if he has young children, the solar may become a rare setting for familial closeness, where the lord bounces a toddler on his knee or listens to his older sons recite their Latin lessons. Children are often more welcome in the solar than in the more formal spaces of the castle, and it is not uncommon to find a wooden toy horse, a set of crude carved knights, or a scattering of pebbles left by a child playing on the floor. Despite the relative formality of the room, the solar is a place where the family can momentarily let down their guard and experience a semblance of warmth and normalcy in a world dominated by political intrigue, feuding, and constant vigilance. During the evening hours, the solar takes on a different atmosphere. The sunlight fades, and the room is lit by flickering candles, their golden flames casting long shadows on the walls. The air grows colder, and the fire is stoked with fresh logs, the scent of burning wood mingling with the lingering aroma of beeswax candles. The family gathers closer to the hearth, their faces bathed in a warm orange glow as they listen to a story, a reading from a sacred text, or the strains of a lute played softly in the corner. If the lord is in a contemplative mood, he might sit alone by the window, his eyes fixed on the darkening landscape beyond. From this vantage point, he can see the courtyard below, the flickering torches of the watchmen patrolling the walls, and the distant lights of the village where his tenants are retiring to their huts for the night. The solar provides a rare moment of solitude, a place where the lord can reflect on the events of the day, ponder alliances and rivalries, and perhaps wrestle with more personal concerns that he cannot express in the public setting of the hall. For the lady of the castle, the solar can be a place of subtle influence, where she advises her husband on matters of diplomacy or manages the household accounts. while the public spaces of the castle are dominated by the male sphere of combat, politics, and power. The solar is a domain where the lady exerts her own form of control, quietly managing the domestic sphere with a deft hand and a sharp eye for detail. On particularly cold nights, the solar may also serve as a makeshift bedroom, with the family huddling close to the hearth to escape the chill that seeps through the stone walls. The thick wooden shutters are drawn tight, the rushes on the floor are freshly laid, and extra blankets and furs are brought in to provide additional warmth. The solar, in these moments, becomes a small, intimate cocoon in an otherwise harsh and unyielding world, a place where the family can come together, share a final cup of spiced wine or mulled ale, and speak in hushed tones as the wind howls outside and the castle walls creak and groan in the darkness. The solar is a paradoxical space, both a refuge and a place of power, both private and yet filled with subtle political undertones. It is a room that embodies the duality of life in a medieval castle, where even moments of relaxation are tinged with tension, and where even the most intimate of spaces are imbued with the ever-present need to maintain status, reputation, and control. The castle kitchens are a world unto themselves, a hive of activity hidden away from the more refined and dignified areas of the castle. Located in a separate wing or in a lower level to minimize the risk of fire spreading to the main living quarters, the kitchens are sprawling, cavernous rooms filled with smoke, heat, and the constant clatter of pots and pans. The air is thick with the mingling scents of roasting meat, baking bread, boiling stews, and the pungent aroma of herbs and spices. The kitchen is overseen by the cook, a stern and formidable figure who wields absolute authority in this realm. The cook's domain is a complex, highly organized space where every task is assigned to specific servants, each one responsible for a different aspect of the meal. The scullions, the lowest-ranking servants, are tasked with the most menial and labor-intensive jobs, scrubbing pots and pans, chopping wood for the hearths, and fetching water from the well. Their hands are raw and blistered from hours of scrubbing and hauling, their clothes stained with grease and soot. Above them, the kitchen boys are responsible for preparing the raw ingredients, plucking feathers from freshly slaughtered birds, gutting fish, and slicing meat into manageable cuts. The more experienced kitchen hands handle the delicate art of seasoning and cooking, stirring great cauldrons of bubbling pottage, basting meat with rich spice sauces, and keeping a watchful eye on the spits that turn slowly over the roaring fire. The fires themselves are a constant source of danger, requiring vigilant attention to prevent a blaze that could easily reduce the entire castle to ashes. Dominating the kitchen is the hearth, a massive, open fireplace that stretches nearly the entire length of one wall. Its stone walls are blackened with decades of soot and smoke, and its roaring flames cast a hellish glow over the bustling workers. Several spits hang over the fire, each one bearing a carcass of meat, a whole boar, a side of venison, or a string of plucked pheasants, their skin crisping and sizzling as the fat drips into the flames below. The spit boys, young lads often covered in sweat and grime, stand by these spits for hours, their arms aching as they turn the heavy handles to ensure even cooking. Nearby, a collection of iron pots and cauldrons bubble and steam, each one containing a different stew or soup. These mixtures are often thick and hearty, made from whatever ingredients are available: root vegetables, beans, barley, and scraps of meat or fish. The cook, armed with a long wooden spoon, tastes each pot in turn, adding pinches of salt, spoonfuls of honey, or sprigs of thyme and rosemary to enhance the flavour. While the lord and his guests feast on the choicest cuts of meat and the most delicately spiced sauces, the kitchen staff subsists on simpler fare: coarse bread, porridge, and thin pottage made from the leftovers and less desirable cuts. Along another wall, A large wooden table serves as the primary workspace, its surface scarred with years of chopping, slicing, and kneading. The bakers knead great mounds of dough, their hands moving rhythmically as they fold and press the dense mixture. The dough is then shaped into loaves, left to rise, and finally placed in a brick oven, where the heat bakes them to a dark, crusty finish. Bread is a staple of every meal, and its quality reflects the castle's wealth and resources. Coarse, dark bread made from rye or barley is served to the lower-ranking household members, while the lord and his family enjoy fine white bread made from wheat, a rare and expensive commodity. In a separate alcove, the pastry cooks prepare more delicate fare, tarts filled with spiced fruits, flaky pastries stuffed with minced meat and herbs, and elaborate pies shaped to resemble castles, animals, or mythical beasts. These pies are not only a culinary delight, but also a statement of wealth and artistic skill, designed to impress guests and demonstrate the lord's opulence. Sometimes, these pies are even filled with live birds, which are released in a dramatic display when the crust is cut open, a spectacle meant to amuse and astonish the assembled guests. Nearby, the butchery is a place of blood and bone, where carcasses are hung from iron hooks, their weight pulling at the sinews as they are stripped of hide and hacked into manageable pieces. The butcher, a burly man with a cleaver in one hand and a whetstone in the other, works methodically, separating the meat from the bone, setting aside the choicest cuts for the lord's table, and reserving the tougher, gristlier pieces for the servant's stew. Nothing is wasted. Bones are boiled to make stock, fat is rendered into lard, and offal is chopped and mixed with barley to create sausages and puddings. The pantry is another crucial area of the kitchen, a cool, dark room where provisions are stored and preserved. Shelves are lined with sacks of flour, barrels of salted fish, and jars of pickled vegetables. Hooks hang from the ceiling, bearing strings of dried sausages, smoked hams, and herbs bundled and tied with twine. In a time before refrigeration, preserving food is a matter of survival, and the cook guards the pantry with a keen eye, ensuring that nothing goes to waste and that the supplies are carefully rationed to last through the harsh winter months. Adjacent to the pantry is the buttery, where barrels of ale and wine are stored. The butler, who is responsible for managing these stores, measures out portions of ale for the servants and fine wine for the lord and his guests. The buttery is a place of secrets and whispered gossip, as the butler often overhears the most private conversations while serving drinks, and his discretion is a valuable asset. Despite the ceaseless toil and heat, the kitchen is also a place of camaraderie and kinship. The servants share stories, sing bawdy songs, and exchange gossip as they work, their laughter and chatter punctuating the steady clang of pots and the crackle of the hearth. The cook, though gruff and demanding, is also fiercely protective of his staff, ensuring that they are fed, even if it is with the simpler fare of porridge and pottage. But the kitchen is also a place where class distinctions are starkly drawn. The lord and his family dine in the hall, feasting on the finest delicacies, while the kitchen staff eats in the shadows, huddled around the hearth with wooden bowls and crusts of stale bread. The difference in diet is a constant reminder of their place in the castle hierarchy, a hierarchy that is reinforced by every slice of bread and every spoonful of soup. The work in the kitchen is relentless, from the pre-dawn hours when the fires are first kindled, to the late-night hours when the last pots are scrubbed and the floors are swept clean. Despite the exhausting labour, the kitchen is a vital nerve centre of the castle, a place where food, drink, and sustenance are produced in abundance, and where every meal is a testament to the wealth, power, and hospitality of the lord and his household. Though unseen by most of the castle's noble guests, the kitchen is a world of sweat, fire, and endless toil. A world where the labour of dozens of unseen hands brings the sumptuous feasts of the Great Hall to life. And in that world, every dish, every loaf of bread, every steaming pot of stew is not just food. It is the product of hours of labor, skill, and dedication, a reflection of both the harshness and the warmth of life within the castle walls. The castle's great hall stands as the beating heart of the medieval stronghold, a vast and imposing chamber where life unfolds in all its grandiosity and intensity. Stretching the entire length of the central keep, the hall is an architectural marvel, with its high vaulted ceiling supported by massive timber beams that groan under the weight of centuries. The walls are thick, stone fortifications, their cold surfaces adorned with rich tapestries that depict scenes of hunting, battle, and courtly romance. These woven works serve a dual purpose. Not only do they display the Lord's wealth and status, but they also provide much-needed insulation, absorbing the chill that perpetually seeps through the stone walls. At one end of the hall, a colossal hearth yawns open, its flames leaping and crackling, casting flickering shadows across the room. The hearth is both a source of warmth and a focal point of social life, drawing people close on cold winter nights when the wind howls outside like a restless ghost. The smell of burning wood mingles with the scents of roasting meat, spiced wine, and the occasional whiff of unwashed bodies. Above the hearth hangs a tapestry bearing the coat of arms of the Lord's family, a symbol of lineage and power that silently asserts itself over all who enter. The hall is dominated by a long, heavy wooden table, its surface scarred with the marks of countless meals, feasts, and banquets. This table serves as the gathering place for the Lord and his retinue, a stage where the drama of medieval life is played out daily. At the head of the table sits the Lord himself, elevated on a raised dais, his chair larger and more ornate than those of his guests. The chair is often carved with intricate patterns, lions, eagles, dragons, symbols of power, protection, and prestige. During mealtimes, the great hall becomes a hive of activity. Servants move swiftly between the kitchen and the table, carrying heavy platters laden with roasted game, thick slabs of bread, steaming pottage, and pitchers of ale. The food is served in large communal dishes, from which each guest is expected to help themselves. There are no individual plates. Instead, people eat from trenchers. Thick slabs of stale bread that serve as makeshift plates, soaking up the juices and sauces. These trenchers are eventually fed to the dogs or given to the poor. For the Lord and his honoured guests, the fare is far more lavish. Roasted swans, pheasants stuffed with herbs, venison marinated in rich, spiced wine. These are delicacies reserved for the upper echelons of society. The lower-ranking guests, servants, and guards receive simpler fare: dark bread, salted fish, and pottage, a thick, hearty stew made from beans, barley, and whatever scraps of meat can be spared. Even in the communal setting of the Great Hall, the distinctions of class are strictly observed. During feasts and celebrations, the Great Hall is transformed into a spectacle of light, sound, and sensation. Candles and torches are lit, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests. Minstrels play lutes and harps, filling the air with lively tunes or haunting ballads that recount tales of chivalry, betrayal, and tragic love. Acrobats and jesters perform tricks and bawdy skits, their antics eliciting laughter and applause, while trained dogs leap through hoops or dance to the rhythm of a tambourine. In the midst of the revelry, the Lord presides over the festivities, flanked by his knights and closest advisors. He raises his goblet, a finely crafted vessel made of pewter or even silver, and calls for a toast, his voice booming across the hall. The guests respond in unison, their goblets raised high, the wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. The toasts are often grandiose, invoking the glory of the family, the strength of the castle, or the lord's recent victories in battle. But the Great Hall is not merely a place of feasting and entertainment. It is also the political heart of the castle, where the lord conducts business, holds court, and administers justice. Each morning the lord takes his seat at the head of the table, and his subjects are summoned to present their grievances. Farmers petition for protection against bandits, tradesmen dispute debts, and peasants plead for leniency in times of famine. The lord listens, surrounded by his council, the steward, the bailiff, and the knights, who murmur their advice in hushed tones. Punishments for crimes are also meted out in the Great Hall, transforming the space from a place of festivity to one of solemnity and fear. Minor infractions, such as theft or drunkenness, may be punished with fines, public humiliation, or time in the stocks. More serious offences, however, demand harsher sentences. A man accused of treason might be dragged before the lord, his wrists bound in iron shackles, while the assembled household looks on in tense silence. The lord, seated high above the accused, pronounces judgment with the weight of a king, and the sentence is carried out swiftly. A flogging, a branding, or even a beheading in the courtyard. Despite the stern administration of justice, the Great Hall is also a place of refuge, a sanctuary from the dangers outside the castle walls. During times of war or siege, the hall becomes a makeshift barracks, its vast floor strewn with sleeping soldiers, the wounded moaning softly in their cots. The hearth blazes day and night, its flames consuming the last of the precious firewood as the inhabitants huddle close, listening to the distant sound of enemy soldiers beating against the castle gates. At night, when the feasting is done and the guests have retired to their chambers, the Great Hall grows quiet. The fire dies down to a few glowing embers, the candles gutter and extinguish, and the echoes of laughter and music fade into silence. Servants sweep the floor, collecting the discarded trenchers and mopping up spilled wine. The smell of roasted meat still lingers in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of smoke and the musty odour of damp stone. Before the last candle is snuffed out, a lone watchman takes up his post by the hearth, his cloak drawn tight against the chill. He gazes into the dying embers, his mind wandering to the feasts and battles he has witnessed within these walls, the lives that have come and gone beneath the vaulted ceiling. The Great Hall, once filled with noise and revelry, now stands empty and silent, a cavernous expanse where only the shadows dance, and the echoes of the past linger in the stillness. In the morning, the cycle will begin anew. The fire will be rekindled, the tables set, and the Great Hall will once again come to life with the sounds of voices, laughter, and the clatter of cups and dishes. For as long as the castle stands, the Great Hall will remain its living heart, a place of power, politics, punishment, and celebration, where the story of the castle and all its inhabitants is written, one feast, one battle, one banquet at a time. Beneath the grandeur of the castle lies a labyrinth of subterranean chambers and tunnels, the dark and often overlooked underworld of medieval fortress life. These lower levels, composed of storerooms, dungeons, and vaults, are essential to the castle's function and survival. Yet they are shrouded in shadows, steeped in musty air, and filled with the echoes of centuries past. Descending the spiral stone staircase from the main hall, the air grows colder and heavier, the light from above gradually fading until only the flickering glow of a torch or lantern pierces the darkness. The walls here are thick and damp, covered in patches of moss and streaks of moisture that drip down to form shallow, murky puddles on the uneven stone floor. The scent is a mixture of earth, stale air, and something more elusive, the faint, lingering odour of rot and decay. The first chamber encountered is the storeroom, an essential component of any castle's defences. In times of peace, it serves as a pantry, filled with sacks of grain, barrels of salted meat and fish, crates of dried beans and peas, and jugs of oil and vinegar. Large wooden shelves are stacked with earthenware jars containing preserved fruits, pickled vegetables, and medicinal herbs. The floor is scattered with straw to absorb any spilled liquids and to provide a cushion against the chill of the stone. During times of siege, the storeroom becomes a lifeline. Every scrap of food is carefully inventoried, and the rationing begins. Guards patrol the area, ensuring that no one takes more than their share. Servants are tasked with checking for signs of spoilage, the smell of mouldy bread, the sight of weevils wriggling in the grain sacks, the oily sheen of rancid meat. Even in the depths of the castle, the fear of starvation looms large. Moving deeper into the subterranean maze, the air grows colder, the darkness thicker. The flickering torchlight casts eerie, shifting shadows along the walls as the corridor narrows, the ceiling lowering until one must stoop to continue. Here, hidden away from the prying eyes of the upper levels, lies the dungeon. The dungeon is a place of whispers and secrets, a grim reminder of the castle's power and authority. Thick wooden doors, reinforced with iron bars, line the corridor, each concealing a small, dank cell. Inside, the stone walls are rough and unyielding, the floor cold and unforgiving. The only source of light is a narrow slit high on the wall, just enough to allow a thin beam of daylight to penetrate the darkness, creating an eerie, prison-like atmosphere. Some cells contain nothing but straw-strewn floors and rusted chains bolted to the walls. Others hold crude wooden cots or simple stools, their surfaces marred with scratches and graffiti left behind by former prisoners. The air is heavy with the scent of sweat, urine, and despair. Rats scurry across the floor, their tiny claws scraping against the stone. Occasionally, a distant, muffled moan or the clanking of chains echoes through the corridor, a haunting reminder that life still lingers in the shadows. The dungeon serves multiple purposes. It is a holding area for thieves, traitors, and captured enemies, a place of interrogation where torches cast their flickering light over fearful, anguished faces. It is also a space for punishment. Stocks, whips, and branding irons lie in one corner, ready to administer pain and suffering to those who defy the Lord's will. Further along, another chamber reveals itself. The wine cellar, a space that serves both practical and social functions. The room is cool and dry, with rows of wooden racks stretching from floor to ceiling, each holding dozens of casks and barrels filled with wine, ale, and mead. Here, the Lord Steward keeps a careful record of every drop, ensuring that the castle's precious reserves are protected from theft and spoilage. The cellar is a place of relative calm, where the scent of fermented grapes and aging wood pervades the air. During feasts and celebrations, servants are dispatched to this hidden chamber to retrieve the finest vintages, filling flagons and goblets that will flow freely throughout the Great Hall. But in times of famine or siege, the cellar takes on a different role. Its barrels are tightly rationed, their contents stretched as far as possible to provide a momentary reprieve from the hardships above. Nearby, a small room serves as the armory, a place of steel and leather, where the castle's weapons and armour are stored, inspected and maintained. Rows of swords, spears, axes and crossbows hang on the walls, each glinting dully in the torchlight. Wooden racks hold shields emblazoned with the Lord's crest, while bundles of arrows lie in neat, tightly bound clusters. Here, the blacksmith works tirelessly, hammering dents out of breastplates, sharpening blades, and mending chainmail. The clang of metal against metal reverberates through the chamber, a harsh, relentless sound that reminds all within earshot of the ever-present threat of war. In times of conflict, the armory becomes a hive of activity, with squires and knights rushing to arm themselves before heading to the battlements. Beyond the armory lies the crypt, a solemn sacred space reserved for the castle's deceased. The air here is heavy and still, imbued with the scent of incense and the musty odour of decaying stone. Torches burn low, their flames casting long, wavering shadows over the rows of stone sarcophagi. Each tomb is engraved with the name and title of the departed, along with carved symbols of their rank and status. The crypt is a place of quiet reflection, a reminder of mortality amidst the castle's imposing walls. Family members of the Lord rest here, their bodies encased in stone, their faces rendered in solemn, lifelike relief. Visitors might leave offerings of flowers or candles, while priests mutter prayers for the souls of the departed, their voices echoing eerily in the stillness. Perhaps the most enigmatic part of the castle's underworld is the network of secret tunnels and hidden passages that snake beneath the surface, weaving their way through the foundations and leading to unknown exits. These tunnels, known only to the Lord and a select few, provide an escape route in case of invasion or siege. Some passages open to distant fields, others to concealed trapdoors in the forest, or even to nearby villages. Navigating these passages requires a keen sense of direction, as the corridors twist and turn, often doubling back on themselves in a maze-like pattern. The air here is stale, the walls close and confining. Many tunnels are pitch black, with no torches to light the way, forcing those who pass through to rely solely on their memory and sense of touch. Some tunnels are booby-trapped, equipped with false floors that drop into pits, or narrow choke points where guards can ambush intruders. Others lead to hidden chambers where contraband, weapons, or even prisoners might be kept in total secrecy. The knowledge of these passages is a closely guarded secret, passed down from one lord to the next, ensuring that the castle's secrets remain hidden from all but the most trusted allies. In the dim, subterranean depths of the castle, life takes on a different rhythm, slower, quieter, yet fraught with its own tensions and mysteries. The storerooms guard against starvation, the dungeons against rebellion, the armory against invasion, and the tunnels against capture. It is a world where light is scarce, silence reigns, and every creak and whisper carries a sense of foreboding. Above ground, the castle may appear a symbol of power, wealth, and grandeur, but below, it reveals a darker, grittier reality, one where the cold stone walls bear witness to suffering, sacrifice, and the relentless struggle for survival. Here, in the shadowed depths, the castle keeps its secrets, buried deep beneath layers of stone, earth, and time. In the heart of the castle, where the daily life of its residents unfolds, the kitchens are a world unto themselves, a place of constant motion, intense heat, and ceaseless labour. The kitchen is a hive of activity, filled with the clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of roasting meat, and the chatter of cooks shouting orders and instructions. It is the engine that fuels the entire household, producing everything from humble porridge to elaborate banquets fit for a king. At the centre of the kitchen stands the massive hearth, a structure of stone and brick that serves as the primary source of heat and cooking space. The hearth is enormous, capable of holding multiple pots, spits, and cauldrons simultaneously. The fire roars day and night, fed by a steady supply of logs brought in from the surrounding woods. The scent of burning wood mingles with the rich, savoury aroma of stews simmering and meats roasting, creating a heady, smoky atmosphere that clings to the air and to the clothes of every cook and servant. Above the fire hangs a series of iron hooks and chains, each adjustable to control the height of pots and cauldrons. A cauldron of pottage, a thick, hearty stew made from a mixture of meat, vegetables, and grains, bubbles away, the broth thickening as it simmers. The contents of the pot vary depending on the season and the Lord's budget. During lean times, The stew is little more than watery gruel flavoured with root vegetables and scraps of salted meat. During feasts, it is a rich concoction of venison, rabbit, and exotic spices imported from distant lands. Beside the hearth stands a spit, a long rotating rod upon which whole animals are roasted. Spit roasting is a time-consuming and labour-intensive process, requiring a servant, often a young boy known as the turnspit, to keep the spit rotating constantly to ensure even cooking. The turnspit boy is stationed by the fire for hours, sweat pouring down his face as he turns the heavy, grease-slicked rod. The smell of roasting meat fills the air, the fat dripping onto the flames and sending up hissing plumes of smoke. In addition to the main hearth, the kitchen is equipped with a variety of other cooking implements and stations. There is a bread oven, a dome-shaped structure made of brick and clay, heated by burning logs until the interior is blisteringly hot. The coals are then raked out, and loaves of dense, dark bread are slid inside using long-handled paddles. The bread is a staple of the medieval diet, served at every meal, and its quality varies depending on the household's wealth. Peasants receive coarse, grainy loaves made from barley and rye, while the lord and his guests enjoy softer, whiter bread made from refined wheat flour. Nearby, a separate area serves as the pastry kitchen, where pies and pastries are prepared. Here, flour dust hangs in the air like a fine mist, coating the work tables and floors. The pastry cooks knead and roll dough, cutting it into intricate shapes and filling it with mixtures of minced meat, dried fruits, and spices. Pies serve both as food and as a method of preservation. The thick crust acts as a protective shell, sealing in the fillings and preventing spoilage. In wealthier households, the pies are elaborate constructions adorned with decorative crusts and served with rich gravies and sauces. The kitchen also includes a larder, a cool, dark room lined with shelves and hooks for storing perishable foods. Here, sides of beef and pork hang from the ceiling, slowly curing in the cool air. Fish, caught fresh from nearby rivers or lakes, are salted or smoked to extend their shelf life. Jars of pickled vegetables, salted meats, and preserved fruits are stacked on shelves, each carefully labelled to track its age and contents. Cheese wheels, wrapped in cloth and left to age, emit a pungent, tangy odour that permeates the entire room. Adjacent to the larder is the pantry, where dry goods such as flour, beans, oats, and spices are stored in wooden barrels and sacks. Spices, imported from faraway lands, are kept under lock and key, their rarity and cost making them a valuable commodity. Saffron, cinnamon, pepper, and cloves are carefully weighed and measured before being added to dishes, their presence a sign of the Lord's wealth and influence. The head cook, a stern, no-nonsense figure with flour-streaked hands and a perpetual scowl, presides over the kitchen with a commanding presence. He is responsible for planning the meals, overseeing the preparation, and ensuring that each dish meets the Lord's exacting standards. Under him are a team of assistant cooks, scullery maids, and errand boys, each with a specific task: chopping vegetables, stirring pots, washing dishes, fetching water, and cleaning up the endless mess left behind by the day's cooking. The kitchen is a place of intense heat and noise, where tempers flare as quickly as the fires. The pressure to produce meals on time, to meet the demands of the Lord and his guests, creates a charged atmosphere. Cooks shout orders, knives clatter against wooden chopping boards, and the constant roar of the hearth drowns out all but the loudest voices. The air is thick with the scent of sweat and smoke, and the floors are slippery with spilled grease and flour. Despite the chaos, there is a rhythm to the kitchen's operation, a well-practiced dance in which each member of the staff knows their role and performs it with mechanical precision. The turnspit boy keeps the spit turning. The scullery maid scrubs pots until her fingers are raw. The head cook tastes each dish, adding a pinch of salt here, a dash of pepper there. Meals are prepared in massive quantities, served on wooden platters and pewter dishes that are carried up to the great hall by servants who scurry back and forth like ants, balancing trays piled high with steaming meats, fragrant stews, and freshly baked bread. Yet even as the feast is served and the Lord and his guests indulge in the bounty of the kitchen's labour, the work below continues. There are dishes to wash, pots to scrub, floors to sweep, and fires to stoke. The kitchen never truly sleeps. Even in the dead of night, a servant stokes the hearth to keep the fire burning, ensuring that the embers will be ready for the first meal of the new day. In this world of fire and steel, sweat and steam, the kitchen is both the beating heart of the castle and the source of its sustenance. It is a place where the rich scents of roasting meat mingle with the sharp tang of vinegar and the earthy aroma of fresh bread. It is a world where knives are always sharp, pots always boiling, and tempers always on the edge of flaring. And though the lords and ladies dine in opulent halls far above, it is here, in the dark, smoky depths of the kitchen, that the real work of the castle is done, day after day, year after year. In the grand scheme of medieval castle life, hygiene and sanitation are often overlooked, but vitally important aspects of daily existence. Unlike the romanticized depictions of courtly life, the reality was far less glamorous. Castles were imposing fortresses of stone, but they were also breeding grounds for filth, odours, and disease. Managing waste, maintaining personal cleanliness, and preventing the spread of illness were constant challenges for those living within the castle walls. Starting with the most basic aspect, the disposal of human waste. Castles were equipped with garderobes, which were primitive toilets built into the outer walls of the structure. These small, closet-like rooms consisted of a wooden bench with a hole cut into it, through which waste would drop down to the moat or a cesspit below. The location of the garderobe along the castle's exterior walls was strategic, as the flowing moat would carry away much of the waste, or at least disperse it. However, during times of drought, or when the moat was stagnant, the waste would accumulate, creating a foul-smelling, unsanitary mess that attracted rodents and insects. The garderobes were often located near the bedchambers of the lord and lady for easy access, but they were far from private or comfortable. In winter, they were bitterly cold, with icy draughts seeping through the stone walls. The stench was nearly unbearable, as the waste was only occasionally cleared away by unlucky servants whose job it was to scoop it out and transport it to a dumping ground away from the castle. Additionally, the garderobes were not immune to pests. Rats and other vermin would occasionally crawl up the chutes, a constant reminder of the unsanitary conditions that pervaded even the most regal of castles. For the lower-ranking servants and soldiers who did not have access to a garderobe, waste disposal was even more rudimentary. They often relieved themselves in buckets or chamber pots, which were then dumped outside, either into the courtyard or over the castle walls. The accumulation of waste in such close quarters presented a serious health hazard, contributing to the spread of disease and the pervasive odour that permeated castle life. It was not uncommon for illnesses such as dysentery and typhoid to spread rapidly, exacerbated by poor sanitation and the close living quarters of castle inhabitants. Bathing was another challenge in a medieval castle. While the wealthy lords and ladies might have access to a private wooden tub filled with heated water, the average servant or soldier had far less luxurious options. Bathing was considered a rare and labour-intensive event, as water had to be drawn from a well or river, carried to the castle, and heated over a fire before being poured into a tub. This laborious process meant that full-body baths were reserved for special occasions or for the sick, with most people relying on simple wash basins to clean their hands, faces, and feet. Herbs and scented oils were often added to bathwater to mask the smell of unwashed bodies and to ward off disease, as it was widely believed that strong scents could prevent illness. Lavender, rosemary, and mint were common choices, their aromatic properties serving both as deodorants and rudimentary disinfectants. However, given the scarcity of water and the labour involved in preparing a bath, many people went weeks or even months without fully washing themselves, relying instead on linen undergarments to absorb sweat and grime. Linen was prized for its ability to wick moisture away from the body, and it was customary for people to own several sets of undergarments that could be changed and washed more frequently than outer garments. In the absence of regular bathing, people relied heavily on these linen shifts and chemises to keep their skin as clean as possible. Washing clothes was itself a labour-intensive task, requiring servants to haul water, scrub garments with lye soap, and then hang them to dry. The drying process could take days, especially in the damp, draughty interiors of the castle, and the smell of wet linen mixed with lingering body odour was a pervasive part of everyday life. Dental hygiene was equally rudimentary. Toothbrushes, as we know them, did not exist, but people used small sticks or cloths to rub their teeth, often using a mixture of salt, herbs, or ashes as a rudimentary toothpaste. The wealthy sometimes chewed on fennel seeds or cloves to freshen their breath, while the poor had to make do with whatever herbs they could forage. Dental care was primitive, and toothaches, abscesses, and rotting teeth were common afflictions, particularly among those who consumed a diet high in bread and other starchy foods. Beyond personal hygiene, the overall cleanliness of the castle itself was a monumental task. The Great Hall, where meals were served and guests entertained, was a focal point of castle life, but also a repository for spilled food, discarded bones, and the droppings of the hunting dogs that roamed freely. After a feast, the rushes strewn across the floor to provide cushioning and insulation would be trampled underfoot, becoming a tangled, filthy mass of food scraps, spilled ale, and other refuse. These rushes were replaced periodically, but in the meantime, they harboured insects, vermin, and bacteria. To combat the pervasive stench of unwashed bodies, decaying waste, and rotting rushes, castle dwellers relied on herbs, flowers, and other natural scents. Lavender, sage, and chamomile were strewn across the floors or burned in small braziers to mask unpleasant odours. Perfumed oils and scented waters were also used by the wealthy to freshen their clothes and linens, though for the poor, such luxuries were out of reach. Additionally, vermin were a constant problem in the castle, drawn to the abundance of food scraps and waste. Rats and mice scurried through the kitchens and storerooms, while fleas and lice infested bedding and clothing. Cats and dogs were often kept to control the rodent population, but even they could not fully eliminate the problem. The presence of so many people living in such close quarters, combined with the lack of effective sanitation and pest control, created the ideal breeding ground for outbreaks of illness and disease. One of the most feared afflictions of the medieval era was the plague, which spread rapidly through castles and towns alike. The lack of basic sanitation, coupled with the close living quarters and the presence of vermin, made castles particularly vulnerable to outbreaks. During times of plague, entire sections of a castle might be quarantined, and the sick isolated in small chambers away from the rest of the inhabitants. But without effective medical knowledge or treatment, such measures were largely futile, and death often swept through the castle unchecked. Yet despite the filth, the odours, and the ever-present threat of disease, life in a castle continued unabated. The people adapted to the conditions, learning to live with the grime and discomfort as best they could. After all, to them, it was simply the way things were. The normal state of affairs in a world where stone walls offered protection from outside threats but little respite from the realities of daily life. The grandeur of the castle, with its imposing towers and majestic halls, was tempered by the grittier, earthier realities of human existence, a stark contrast between the ideals of nobility and the visceral reality of survival in a world still struggling to tame the forces of nature. When night fell over a medieval castle, the atmosphere transformed entirely. The bustling activity of the day quieted down, the clamour of blacksmiths hammering away at their anvils subsided, and the echoing voices of soldiers drilling in the courtyard ceased. As the setting sun cast long, ominous shadows across the stone walls, the castle became an eerie and isolated stronghold, its inhabitants retreating to their quarters to seek warmth and protection against the encroaching darkness. The medieval night was a time of vulnerability. The absence of artificial light meant that the only illumination came from torches, candles, and hearth fires, their flickering flames casting strange, wavering shadows that danced along the stone walls. This interplay of light and dark heightened the sense of mystery, and with it, the superstitions and fears that thrived in the minds of those who lived within the castle. The medieval world was rife with tales of ghosts, restless spirits, and other worldly creatures that roamed the night, and the deep, impenetrable darkness only served to magnify such fears. The great hall, which had been filled with activity during the day, now lay silent and empty, its massive stone hearths still radiating the last vestiges of heat from the evening's meal. Servants hurriedly snuffed out candles to conserve precious wax, while others placed heavy iron screens in front of the hearths to prevent sparks from leaping onto the rushes strewn across the floor. These rushes, once fresh and fragrant, were now a tangled, filthy mass of trampled herbs, food scraps, and grime, but they provided some insulation against the bitter chill that settled over the castle at night. The lords and ladies of the castle retired to their bedchambers, which were often located in the upper levels of the keep for added security. These rooms were furnished with large wooden beds draped with thick, heavy curtains that could be drawn to keep out drafts and provide a semblance of privacy. The beds themselves were filled with straw, feathers, or wool, and covered with blankets and furs to ward off the cold. While the wealthiest inhabitants might sleep on relatively comfortable mattresses, most people made do with straw pallets or wooden benches, their bodies wrapped in woolen cloaks to stay warm through the long, frigid night. For those who could not afford the luxury of a private chamber, sleeping arrangements were far less comfortable. Servants, soldiers, and lower-ranking castle residents often slept in communal areas, such as the Great Hall or the barracks. Here, they huddled together for warmth, their bodies pressed close to one another beneath thin blankets. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale food, and the lingering smoke from the hearths, and the occasional rustle of rodents scurrying across the floor added to the unsettling atmosphere. The sounds of the castle at night were a curious blend of the ordinary and the unnerving. The wind whistled through the arrow slits, creating eerie, mournful sounds that echoed through the corridors. The creaking of wooden beams and the clanking of chains added to the sense of unease, as did the distant howling of wolves or the hooting of owls outside the castle walls. Guards patrolled the battlements, their footsteps echoing against the stone as they kept a wary eye out for signs of intruders or approaching enemies. The stillness of the night heightened their vigilance, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig potentially signaling a threat lurking in the darkness. For those on guard duty, the night was a time of watchfulness and apprehension. The castle gates were securely bolted, and the drawbridge raised to prevent any unauthorized entry. Guards stationed in the watchtowers peered out into the surrounding landscape, their eyes straining to penetrate the blackness. They carried torches to light their way, but the limited reach of the flames meant that vast portions of the castle grounds remained shrouded in shadow, a haunting, impenetrable void. Inside the castle, the kitchens, which had been filled with the warmth of cooking fires and the scent of roasting meats, were now empty and cold. The last of the embers smouldered in the hearths, casting faint, flickering light across the stone walls. The kitchens were vulnerable to vermin, and rats and mice emerged from their hiding places to scavenge for scraps left behind after the evening meal. Cats prowled the kitchen floors, their eyes gleaming in the dim light as they hunted the rodents that scurried through the shadows. In the chapel, the monks and priests maintained their nightly vigils, praying for the souls of the castle's inhabitants and asking for divine protection against the dangers of the night. The flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows across the stone statues of saints and angels, lending them a ghostly, otherworldly appearance. The sound of chanting echoed softly through the cold, cavernous chamber, a solemn, haunting melody that seemed to hang in the air long after the voices fell silent. For the castle's inhabitants, the night was also a time for reflection and storytelling. Families gathered around the hearths, wrapped in blankets and furs, as elders recounted tales of knights and dragons, of battles fought and lost, of kings and queens long gone. These stories served to pass the time and keep the darkness at bay, their familiar rhythms and comforting cadences lulling listeners into a sense of safety and warmth. Yet, as the stories unfolded, they also stirred the imagination, conjuring images of spirits and spectres that lurked just beyond the firelight. The fear of the supernatural was deeply ingrained in medieval culture, and the castle's inhabitants took various precautions to ward off evil spirits during the night. Windows were tightly shuttered to prevent witches and demons from entering, and charms or amulets were placed near beds to protect against curses and malevolent forces. Religious icons, such as crosses or images of saints, were kept close at hand, their presence believed to offer divine protection against the forces of darkness. The castle's dungeons, located deep within the bowels of the keep, were especially eerie at night. The air was thick with dampness, and the walls dripped with moisture, creating a chilling, oppressive atmosphere. Prisoners lay chained to the walls or confined in tiny, windowless cells, their cries echoing through the stone corridors. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional flicker of a torch as a guard made his rounds. In such a place, time seemed to stand still, and the line between waking and dreaming blurred, as the prisoners' minds wandered into realms of nightmare and despair. While the night in a medieval castle was filled with fear and uncertainty, it was also a time of rest and recovery. For those fortunate enough to have a warm bed and a roof over their heads, the night offered a chance to close their eyes and drift into the world of dreams, escaping the harsh realities of life for a few brief hours. Outside, the world remained shrouded in darkness, but within the castle walls, the flickering embers of the hearths continued to glow softly, casting a gentle golden light that whispered of safety, comfort, and the hope of a new day yet to come.